The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Catherine stood by the window of their private quarters, watching William pack his belongings with careful precision. Each folded shirt, each placed photograph seemed to carry the weight of their 23 years together. The silence between them spoke louder than any words they had shared in recent months. William's hands trembled slightly as he lifted their wedding photo from the dresser. In it, they were young, radiant, and completely unaware of the storms that would test their love. Catherine noticed the pause and felt her heart clench. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the growing distance between them, but something held her back. Pride, perhaps, or maybe the fear that one touch would shatter the fragile composure they had both been maintaining. "The children will be back from school soon," Catherine said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time either of them had spoken that morning, and the words hung in the air like autumn leaves waiting to fall. William nodded without turning around. "I know, I want to be gone before then." His voice was steady, but Catherine could hear the pain beneath the surface. She had learned to read every nuance of his expressions over the years, every shift in his tone. This was the voice he used when he was trying to protect everyone else from his own breaking heart. The decision to separate had not come suddenly. It had been building for months, perhaps even years, like pressure in a volcano waiting to erupt. The demands of royal life, the constant scrutiny, the weight of expectations had slowly chipped away at the foundation of their marriage. They had tried counseling, tried taking breaks, tried everything except the one thing that might have saved them. Truly listening to each other without the noise of duty and protocol drowning out their hearts. Catherine remembered the exact moment she knew their marriage was in trouble. It was during a state dinner 6 months ago. William had been giving a speech about unity and togetherness while she sat at the head table, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The irony was not lost on her. Here was her husband, speaking eloquently about connection and partnership to a room full of dignitaries, while they had barely spoken to each other in weeks except about schedules and obligations. The media had started noticing too. Photographers captured every distant glance, every moment when they walked just a little too far apart, every forced smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. The tabloids began their speculation, but William and Catherine had become experts at maintaining appearances. Years of royal training had taught them how to smile through anything, how to present a united front even when they felt anything but united. Their staff had been the first to truly understand what was happening. Margaret, Catherine's longtime personal secretary, had started bringing tissue boxes to their morning briefings without being asked. Thomas, William's private secretary, had begun scheduling their public appearances, with careful attention to keeping them busy enough that they wouldn't have time to think about their personal struggles. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during what should have been a celebration. Their youngest child, Louis, had won his first school debate competition. Catherine had been so proud, so excited to share the news with William when he returned from his environmental summit. But when she called him with the good news, she could hear the distraction in his voice, the way he was only half listening as he shuffled through papers and responded to other people in the room. "That's wonderful, darling," he had said, but it was the same tone he used for everything lately. The same polite, distant tone he used with strangers. Catherine had hung up the phone and cried for the first time in months, not because of what he had said, but because of what he hadn't said. He hadn't asked for details. He hadn't asked to speak to Louis. He hadn't asked anything at all. Now, watching him fold the last of his clothes into the suitcase, Catherine felt the finality of their decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. They had agreed that a separation was necessary, that they needed space to figure out who they were as individuals before they could determine if they could still be partners. It was a mature, rational decision that had been discussed calmly and logically. So why did it feel like her world was ending? William closed the suitcase with a soft click that seemed to echo through the room. He turned to face her, and for a moment Catherine saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. The man who had made her laugh until her sides hurt, who had held her through her father's illness, who had danced with her in their kitchen at midnight just because their favorite song came on the radio. "Catherine," he began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "Please don't," she whispered. "If you say goodbye now, I might not let you leave." He nodded, understanding. They had always been able to communicate without words. Even now, when words seemed to fail them entirely, William picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. At the threshold, he paused but didn't turn around. "I love you," he said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens, that will never change." Catherine closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. "I love you too," she replied. "That's why this is so hard." The sound of the door closing behind him was the quietest sound she had ever heard, and the loudest. The afternoon light filtered through the nursery windows as Catherine sat on the floor, surrounded by photo albums she hadn't opened in years. After William left, she had wandered through their home like a ghost, unable to settle anywhere until she found herself here, in the room where they had spent countless hours with their children when they were babies. Her phone buzzed with messages from concerned friends and family members, but she couldn't bring herself to read them yet. The palace staff had been discreetly informed of the separation, and she knew the news would eventually reach the public. For now, though, she wanted to exist in this quiet space between her old life and whatever came next. The first album contained pictures from their university days at St. Andrews. Catherine smiled despite her tears as she looked at a photo of William trying to cook pasta in their tiny shared kitchen, his face scrunched in concentration. She remembered how he had burned the garlic and filled their flat with smoke, setting off every alarm in the building. They had eaten cereal for dinner that night, laughing until their stomachs hurt about his culinary disaster. Those early days had been magical in their simplicity. They were just Kate and Will then, two young people falling in love without the weight of crowns and expectations. William would walk her to classes, carrying her books like any other boyfriend. They would study together in the library, sharing headphones and stealing kisses between chapters. Catherine remembered how her heart would race every time he smiled at her, how the whole world seemed to light up when he was near. The transition from university sweethearts to royal couple had been gradual, then sudden. At first, the attention was manageable. A few photographers here and there, some speculation in the society pages, but as their relationship became more serious, the scrutiny intensified. Catherine learned to navigate crowds of cameras, to smile graciously while strangers shouted questions about her personal life. She turned to a page showing their engagement announcement. William looked so nervous in the official photos, constantly adjusting his tie and checking to make sure her ring was positioned correctly. Catherine had been nervous too, but excited. She had thought she was ready for anything as long as they faced it together. The wedding planning had been their first real test. Every decision, from the flowers to the guest list, became a matter of state importance. Catherine had wanted something intimate, personal. The palace had wanted something grand, befitting a future king. In the end, they had found compromises, but Catherine remembered feeling like she was planning someone else's wedding, not her own. Still, their wedding day had been beautiful. Despite the millions watching, despite the protocol and the pressure, there had been moments of pure joy. When William had whispered, "You look beautiful," as she reached the altar, the rest of the world had disappeared. During their first dance, when he had spun her around and made her laugh, she had felt like the luckiest woman alive. The early years of marriage had been challenging but manageable. They had learned to balance their public duties with their private happiness. William had been protective of their time together, insisting on date nights and weekend getaways despite their busy schedules. Catherine had thrown herself into her royal duties, determined to prove herself worthy of her position. The children had brought new joy and new challenges. Catherine remembered the first time she had held George, how William had cried with happiness and exhaustion. They had been so young, so overwhelmed, but so committed to being good parents. Those midnight feedings and diaper changes had somehow brought them closer together, united in their determination to give their children as normal a childhood as possible. But somewhere along the way, they had started drifting apart. Catherine couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. Maybe it was when William became more involved in his environmental work, traveling constantly for conferences and initiatives. Maybe it was when Catherine took on more patronages and found herself equally busy with her own commitments. Or maybe it was simply the natural erosion that happens when two people stop making each other a priority. She found a photo from Louis's christening, just 2 years ago. In it, she and William were standing together, smiling at the camera while holding their youngest son. To anyone looking at the picture, they appeared happy and united. But Catherine could see the distance in their eyes. the way they were leaning slightly away from each other instead of together. The problems had started small. William would come home from trips and forget to ask about her day. Catherine would schedule events without checking with him first. They stopped sharing meals regularly, stopped going to bed at the same time, stopped talking about anything beyond logistics and schedules. Their arguments, when they happened, were quiet and polite. Royal training had taught them never to raise their voices, never to lose control. But Catherine sometimes thought those civilized disagreements were worse than screaming matches would have been. At least screaming would have shown passion, emotion, investment in the outcome. Their polite discussions felt like business meetings between strangers. The wake-up call had come during their anniversary last year. They had attended a charity gala together, playing the perfect royal couple for the cameras. During the dinner, they had sat side by side making polite conversation with other guests, but they hadn't spoken directly to each other all evening. When they returned home, they had gone to separate bedrooms without discussion, without even saying goodnight. Catherine had lain awake that night wondering when they had become strangers living in the same house. She had tried to remember the last time William had really looked at her, not just glanced in her direction or posed for photos, but actually seen her. She couldn't. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway pulled Catherine from her memories. The children were home from school. She quickly wiped her eyes and closed the photo albums, preparing to put on the brave face she had perfected over the years. George, Charlotte, and Louis would need stability and reassurance, not a mother lost in grief for what used to be. Taking a deep breath, Catherine stood up and smoothed her skirt. She could hear their voices getting closer, their usual after-school chatter about friends and teachers and weekend plans. In a few moments, she would need to find a way to explain why Daddy wouldn't be home for dinner, why his office down the hall was empty, why everything was about to change. But first, she allowed herself one more moment to mourn the family they had been before she started building the family they would become. William sat in his temporary residence, a modest apartment in Kensington that felt both familiar and foreign. He had stayed here during his bachelor days, but now the space felt hollow, echoing with the absence of family life. The silence was deafening after years of coming home to children's laughter, Catherine's gentle humming, and the warm chaos of a lived-in home. He had unpacked methodically, placing his clothes in the wardrobe with the same careful precision he used for everything else. But when it came to the personal items, the photographs and mementos that had shared space with Catherine's things for so many years, he found himself unable to decide where they belonged in this new, uncertain life. His phone rang constantly throughout the day, his father concerned but trying not to interfere, his brother Harry calling from California with words of support and understanding born from his own experiences with marital struggles in the public eye. Friends from school and military service, reaching out with carefully worded messages of support. Each conversation was difficult in its own way, requiring him to explain decisions he wasn't sure he fully understood himself. The hardest call had been to his grandmother before she passed. Even in her final years, she had possessed an uncanny ability to see straight to the heart of any matter. "Sometimes, William," she had told him gently, "the most loving thing two people can do is give each other space to grow. Marriage isn't about never changing. It's about choosing to love each other through the changes." Her words echoed in his mind now as he tried to make sense of what had gone wrong. He and Catherine hadn't fallen out of love exactly. It was more like they had forgotten how to love each other properly. They had become so focused on being the perfect royal couple that they had stopped being William and Kate, the young people who had fallen for each other over shared jokes and late-night conversations. William walked to the window and looked out at the London streets below. Somewhere across the city, Catherine was probably helping the children with their homework or reading them bedtime stories. The thought made his chest tight with longing and regret. He had always been the one to read Louis his favorite book about dragons and knights. Would his youngest son wonder where Daddy was tonight? The decision to separate had been mutual but agonizing. They had spent months in counseling, trying to rediscover the connection that had once seemed unbreakable. Dr. Reynolds, their therapist, had been patient and insightful, helping them understand how the pressures of royal life had gradually eroded their intimacy. But understanding the problem and fixing it were two different things. "You both love your family more than your marriage," Dr. Reynolds had observed during one particularly difficult session. "You've become so focused on protecting your children and fulfilling your duties that you've forgotten to protect and nurture your relationship with each other. The observation had stung because it was true. William remembered the exact moment he had realized how far they had drifted apart. It was during a family vacation in Scotland last summer. The children had been playing by the lake while he and Catherine sat on a blanket nearby. They had spent the entire afternoon in comfortable silence, but when he had tried to think of something to say to her, something personal and meaningful, he had come up empty. They had become co-parents and colleagues rather than lovers and best friends. Their conversations revolved around schedules and responsibilities. Their physical affection had dwindled to polite kisses for the cameras and brief touches during official events. They slept in the same bed but might as well have been in different countries. The breaking point had come during a particularly challenging week in the spring. William had been dealing with a crisis in one of his environmental initiatives while Catherine was managing a difficult situation with one of her patronages. They had both been stressed and exhausted, but instead of turning to each other for support, they had retreated into their separate worlds. When Charlotte had come down with a fever in the middle of the night, they had both rushed to her room. But instead of working together to comfort their daughter, they had ended up in a whispered argument about whether to call the doctor immediately or wait until morning. Catherine had accused William of being overprotective. William had accused Catherine of not taking their daughter's health seriously enough. Later, after Charlotte's fever had broken and she was sleeping peacefully, William and Catherine had sat in their kitchen in exhausted silence. That's when Catherine had said the words that had been haunting both of them ever since. "We can't keep pretending everything is fine. We're not helping the children by staying together if we're not truly together." William had wanted to argue, to insist that they could fix things, that love was enough. But deep down he knew she was right. They had been living parallel lives for too long, connected by duty and children but no longer connected to each other. Now, alone in his apartment, William wondered if they had given up too easily. Should they have tried harder? Fought more? But then he remembered the relief he had felt when Catherine had finally voiced what they had both been thinking. The exhausting effort of pretending to be happy had been wearing them both down. His phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. "The children are asking about you. I told them you're on a work trip, but we'll call them before bed. Louis wants to know if you're bringing back any presents." William smiled despite his sadness. Trust Louis to be concerned about presents. Their youngest had always been the most matter-of-fact about everything, taking life's surprises in stride with the resilience that children seem to possess naturally. He typed back, "Tell him I'll bring back the best present of all, stories about what Daddy's been doing. I'll call at 7:30 for bedtime." Catherine's response came quickly. "They'll love that. Thank you for not disappearing completely." The gratitude in her message broke his heart a little more. Had she really thought he would abandon his children just because their marriage was struggling? But then he realized that his track record lately hadn't been great. He had been so absorbed in his own pain and confusion that he might have seemed distant and unreliable. William made a promise to himself in that moment. Whatever happened between him and Catherine, whatever their future looked like as a couple, he would not let his children pay the price for their parents' inability to make their marriage work. He would find a way to be present for them, to show them that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, but it never truly disappears. As the sun set over London, William prepared to make the most important phone call of his day. Not to a government official or charity representative, but to three little voices who still believed their father could fix anything, even if he wasn't sure he could fix the thing that mattered most. 3 weeks had passed since William moved out, and Catherine was beginning to understand the true meaning of loneliness. Not the temporary solitude that came with William's work travels, but the deeper, more permanent kind that settled into your bones and changed how you moved through the world. The children had adapted with the remarkable resilience that young people possess, but Catherine could see the questions in their eyes. George, now old enough to understand that something significant had changed, had become more protective of his younger siblings. Charlotte had grown quieter, spending more time drawing pictures that she carefully folded and put in her pocket. Louis continued to ask when Daddy was coming home from his work trip, and each time Catherine had to swallow her pain and give him a cheerful non-answer. The hardest part was the evenings. After the children were in bed, after the staff had gone home, Catherine found herself wandering through rooms that felt too large and too quiet. She had never realized how much of her daily rhythm had been built around William's presence. The cup of tea she would make for him when he came home from meetings. The way she would listen for his footsteps on the stairs. The comfortable silence they shared while reading in bed. Each absorbed in their own books but somehow connected by their proximity. Now she made tea for one and drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the gardens they had planned together. The roses William had insisted on planting for their 5th anniversary were blooming magnificently. A cruel reminder of happier times. Catherine's mother had been visiting more frequently, offering support in her characteristically practical way. Carol Middleton had never been one for dramatic displays of emotion, but Catherine could see the concern in her eyes every time she looked at her daughter. "You're too thin," her mother had observed that morning over breakfast. "And you're not sleeping." Catherine had tried to protest, but her mother's knowing look had stopped her. It was true. Food had lost its appeal, and sleep came in fragments interrupted by worry and regret. "I keep thinking about all the things I could have done differently," Catherine admitted, stirring her untouched porridge. "All the times I chose work over conversation, schedule over spontaneity. Maybe if I had paid more attention." "Darling," her mother had said gently, "it takes 2 people to build a marriage and 2 people to let it drift apart. You can't carry all the responsibility for what went wrong." But Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed at the most important job she'd ever had. She had been raised to believe that marriage was sacred, that love could overcome any obstacle with enough effort and commitment. The fact that she and William had reached a point where they needed space from each other felt like a fundamental failure of character. The media attention had been intense but manageable, thanks to the palace's carefully crafted statements about taking time to focus on individual growth while maintaining their commitment to their children and their duties. The public response had been surprisingly supportive, with many people sharing their own stories of marital struggles and eventual reconciliation. Catherine tried to find comfort in these stories, but every marriage was different. What worked for other couples might not work for them. She and William weren't just any couple trying to save their relationship. They were public figures with responsibilities that extended far beyond their personal happiness. Her work had become both a refuge and a burden. Throwing herself into her patronages gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment, but it also reminded her of how she and William had grown apart. They had become so busy changing the world that they had forgotten to tend to their own small corner of it. During a visit to a children's hospital that week, Catherine had met a young mother whose husband was deployed overseas. "The hardest part isn't the separation," the woman had told her. "It's learning how to be yourself again when you've been half of a whole for so long." The words had stayed with Catherine for days. She was realizing that she had lost track of who she was outside of being William's wife and her children's mother. The young woman who had fallen in love with a prince had dreams and ambitions of her own, but somewhere along the way, those had been folded into the larger narrative of royal duty and family life. Catherine had started therapy on her own, working with a different counselor than the one she and William had seen together. Dr. Sarah Martinez was helping her understand patterns of behavior and thought that had developed over years of living in the public eye. "You've spent so much energy being the person everyone else needed you to be," Dr. Martinez had observed during their last session. "When was the last time you asked yourself what you needed?" The question had been harder to answer than Catherine expected. Her needs had always been secondary to everyone else's, which had felt noble and selfless at the time. Now she was beginning to understand that constantly suppressing her own desires and preferences had created a kind of emotional numbness that had affected every relationship in her life, including her marriage. William had been calling the children every evening, and his conversations with Catherine afterward had become slightly less strained. They were learning to navigate this new dynamic, finding ways to co-parent across the distance that had opened between them. "George asked me if we're getting divorced," William had told her during one of these conversations. Catherine's heart had clenched. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that sometimes people need time apart to figure out how to love each other better," William had replied. I don't know if that was the right thing to say. Catherine had found herself crying quietly, moved by the honesty and hopefulness in William's words. Despite everything, he was still trying to protect their children's faith in love and family. "I think that was perfect," she had whispered. These small moments of connection gave Catherine hope, but they also confused her. If they could still support each other through difficult conversations about their children, if they could still find comfort in each other's voices, why couldn't they make their marriage work? The answer, she was beginning to understand, was complicated. Love had never been the problem. They had always loved each other, even when they couldn't seem to reach each other. But love without understanding, without communication, without the daily choice to prioritize each other, wasn't enough to sustain a marriage under the pressures they faced. As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she looked at the space where William's pillow used to be. For the first time since he had left, she didn't move to the center of the bed to claim the extra space. Instead, she stayed on her side, somehow comforted by the preservation of their old sleeping arrangement. Maybe that was what hope looked like in her situation, she thought. Not the dramatic gesture or sudden reconciliation she sometimes fantasized about, but the quiet faith that some things were worth preserving, even when you weren't sure what the future would bring. 2 months into their separation, William found himself in an unexpected place, genuinely enjoying his own company for the first time in years. The apartment that had initially felt like a prison had gradually become a sanctuary where he could think without interruption, eat meals at his own pace, and rediscover interests that had been buried under layers of obligation and routine. He had started painting again, something he hadn't done since university. The easel stood by the window where the light was best, and in the evenings he would lose himself in colors and brushstrokes, creating landscapes that existed only in his memory and imagination. There was something deeply satisfying about creating something purely for himself, with no committee to approve it, no protocol to follow, no public message to convey. His relationship with his children had, surprisingly, grown stronger since the separation. Without the background tension that had characterized family life for the past year, their time together had become more focused and intentional. William no longer felt the need to multitask during their conversations, checking emails while helping with homework or reviewing briefing papers during bedtime stories. Last weekend, he had taken all 3 children to a private beach house in Norfolk, away from cameras and schedules. They had spent 2 days building sandcastles, flying kites, and having the kind of unstructured family time that had become increasingly rare in their lives. George had opened up about his worries regarding his parents' separation, and William had been able to listen fully, without the distraction of thinking about Catherine's reaction or managing family dynamics. "Are you and Mummy happier now?" Charlotte had asked while they walked along the beach, her small hand warm in his. William had considered the question carefully before answering. "We're learning how to be happy in a different way," he had said. "Sometimes people need space to remember who they are before they can figure out how to be together." Charlotte had nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Children, William was learning, were often more adaptable than adults gave them credit for. It was the grown-ups who struggled with change, who clung to familiar patterns even when those patterns no longer served them. His work had also taken on new meaning. Without the need to coordinate schedules with Catherine, William had been able to travel more frequently for his environmental initiatives. He had spent a week in Costa Rica learning about reforestation projects, and another week in Kenya working with conservation groups. The hands-on nature of this work reminded him why he had been drawn to environmental causes in the first place. During his trip to Kenya, William had met a local ranger named Samuel, whose marriage had survived decades of separation due to his work in remote areas. "The secret," Samuel had told him over a campfire one evening, "is remembering that love is not just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day, whether you're together or apart." The words had resonated deeply with William. He realized that somewhere along the way, he and Catherine had stopped choosing each other daily. They had taken their love for granted, assuming it would sustain itself without attention or effort. William had been writing letters to Catherine, though he hadn't sent any of them yet. Writing helped him process his thoughts and feelings without the pressure of immediate response or reaction. In these letters, he explored his regrets, his hopes, and his growing understanding of what had gone wrong in their marriage. In one letter, he had written, "I think we forgot how to be curious about each other. We assumed we knew everything there was to know, but people change and grow, and we stopped asking questions. We stopped discovering new things about each other because we were so busy managing everything else." The therapy sessions he had started attending, were helping him understand his own patterns and behaviors. Dr. James Whitfield, a specialist in high-pressure relationships, was helping William explore how his upbringing as a future king had shaped his approach to marriage and family life. "You were trained from childhood to put duty before personal needs," Dr. Whitfield had observed. "That served you well in your public role, but it may have created challenges in your personal relationships. It's hard to be vulnerable and authentic when you've been conditioned to always be on and in control." William was beginning to recognize the truth in this observation. He had brought the same sense of duty and protocol to his marriage that he applied to his royal responsibilities. But marriages needed spontaneity, emotion, and vulnerability to thrive. They needed the messiness of real human connection, not the polished perfection of public presentation. His relationship with Catherine had evolved into something cautious but caring. Their conversations were becoming easier, less loaded with unspoken grievances and more focused on practical matters and their children's well-being. Sometimes William caught glimpses of the woman he had fallen in love with, particularly when she talked about her work or shared stories about the children. Catherine had started a new initiative working with families affected by domestic violence, and William could hear the passion in her voice when she described the project. It reminded him of the early days of their relationship, when they would spend hours talking about their dreams and aspirations, challenging each other's ideas and supporting each other's goals. "You sound happy," he had told her, after she finished describing a particularly successful workshop she had facilitated. There had been a pause before Catherine replied, "I am in some ways. It's strange, isn't it? I thought I would only feel guilty about being happy while we're separated." William had understood exactly what she meant. He too had been surprised by moments of genuine contentment over the past months. It didn't mean they loved their family less or regretted their life together. It meant they were both learning to find fulfillment that didn't depend entirely on their relationship status. The children had been spending alternate weekends with William, and these visits had become the highlight of his week. Without the familiar surroundings of their family home, they all had to be more intentional about how they spent their time together. They played games, cooked meals, and had conversations that might never have happened in the midst of their usual busy family life. During Louis's last visit, he had crawled into William's lap while they were watching a movie and said, "Daddy, I like our special house. It feels cozy." William had kissed the top of his youngest son's head, feeling a complex mix of gratitude and sadness. His children were finding ways to be happy in this new arrangement, which was wonderful and heartbreaking at the same time. As autumn approached, William found himself thinking more about the future. The separation had given him clarity about his own needs and desires, but it had also made him realize how much he valued his family. The question now was whether he and Catherine could find a way to build something new together, incorporating what they had learned about themselves during their time apart. He picked up his pen and started another letter, this one different from the others. This one he thought he might actually send. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by hand to avoid any possibility of interception. Catherine recognized William's handwriting immediately, the careful script that had addressed countless notes and cards over the years of their marriage. She held the envelope for several minutes before opening it, unsure whether she was ready for whatever it contained. "My dearest Catherine," it began, and she had to sit down at her kitchen table before continuing. "I've written you dozens of letters over these past months, but I never sent them because I was never sure they said what I really needed to say. This one is different. This one comes from a place of clarity rather than confusion, of hope rather than despair. Our separation has taught me things about myself that I don't think I could have learned any other way. I've discovered that I had become someone I didn't particularly like, someone who was so focused on doing the right thing that I forgot to feel the right things. I was giving you the version of myself that I thought a good husband should be, rather than the person I actually am. I want you to know that these months apart haven't been about falling out of love with you. They've been about falling back in love with myself, so that I can love you better. I understand now that I can't be half of a whole relationship. I need to be a complete person who chooses to share his life with another complete person. I miss you, Catherine, not just as my wife or the mother of our children, but as the woman who used to challenge my ideas, who made me laugh until my sides hurt, who saw possibilities in the world that I was too cynical to notice. I miss the conversations we used to have about everything and nothing. I miss the way you would unconsciously reach for my hand when we were walking together. But I don't want to go back to what we had before. I want to build something new. Something better. Something that honors both who we were and who we've become. If you're willing, I'd like to try dating you again. Properly this time, with intention and attention and all the care I should have been giving our relationship all along. I'm not asking for an answer right away. I'm not asking you to forget the pain we've caused each other or pretend that separation has magically solved all our problems. I'm asking if you're willing to explore whether two people who have learned to be happy apart might be able to create something even better together. With all my love and hope, William. Catherine read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It was everything she had hoped to hear and everything she had been afraid to hope for. But more than that, it felt honest in a way their conversations hadn't been in years. She called her mother first, needing to share the overwhelming mix of emotions the letter had stirred up. "What does your heart tell you?" Carol asked after Catherine had read the letter aloud. "That I want to try," Catherine admitted. "But what if we're just setting ourselves up for more heartbreak? What if we can't actually change the patterns that drove us apart in the first place?" "Darling," her mother said gently, "the only way to find out if something can work is to try it. But this time you'll be trying as two people who understand yourselves better. That's got to count for something." Catherine spent the rest of the day thinking about William's proposal. Dating again. It seemed both completely natural and utterly foreign. How did you date someone you'd been married to for over a decade? Someone who had seen you at your worst moments and knew all your flaws and insecurities. But maybe that was exactly why it could work. They could skip past the surface level getting to know you, phase and focus on rediscovering each other as the people they had become. They could approach their relationship with the wisdom that comes from understanding what doesn't work, armed with new tools and insights from their time in therapy. That evening, Catherine sat down to write her own letter. She found herself thinking about the early days of their relationship, when every conversation had felt like a discovery, when they had been genuinely curious about each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. "Dear William," she wrote, "your letter made me cry, but they were good tears. Healing tears. I've been crying a lot lately, actually, but it feels different now, like I'm finally processing emotions I've been holding back for years. You're right that we can't go back to what we had before. I wouldn't want to, even if we could. That marriage was built on assumptions and expectations that neither of us questioned until they became too heavy to carry. But the foundation was real. The love was real. The connection was real. Maybe we can build something new on that foundation. I've learned things about myself too during our separation. I've learned that I need to ask for what I need instead of hoping you'll guess. I've learned that I'm stronger and more independent than I gave myself credit for, but I'm also more vulnerable than I wanted to admit. I've learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, but I prefer sharing my life with someone who really sees me. I would like to try dating you again, William. I'm scared and excited and hopeful and terrified all at the same time. But I think that's probably exactly how I should feel about something this important. I love you too. Not the sanitized public version of love we've been performing lately, but the messy, complicated, beautiful kind of love that requires work and attention and choice every single day. Let's choose each other again, but better this time. With all my love and courage, Catherine." She sealed the letter before she could second-guess herself and arranged for it to be delivered the next morning. Then she called her therapist to schedule an emergency session. If she was going to attempt this reconciliation, she wanted to do it with all the tools and insights she could gather. Dr. Martinez was supportive but cautious when Catherine shared the developments. "It's encouraging that you've both done individual work before attempting to reconnect," she said. "But rebuilding a marriage is different from building one for the first time. You'll be working with the history of your relationship, both the positive and negative aspects." Catherine understood the challenges ahead. They would need to establish new patterns of communication, new ways of prioritizing their relationship alongside their other responsibilities, They would need to be honest about their needs and boundaries, vulnerable about their fears and hopes. But for the first time in months, Catherine felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Not because she thought it would be easy, but because she finally felt like she and William were approaching their relationship as conscious, intentional partners rather than two people going through the motions of marriage. The children, when she told them that Daddy would be coming home soon but that things would be different, reacted with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that children excel at. "Will you and Daddy be happy now?" Louis asked. Catherine considered the question carefully. "We're going to try very hard to be happy together," she said. "But happiness isn't something that just happens. It's something we have to work at every day." George, ever the serious older brother, nodded solemnly. "Like how I have to practice piano every day to get better at it?" "Exactly like that," Catherine said, marveling at her son's wisdom. As she tucked them into bed that night, Catherine felt a sense of completion that had been missing for months. Her family wasn't fixed yet, might never be perfect, but they were choosing to fight for each other. And that, she thought, was the most important victory of all. 6 months later, Catherine stood in the same spot by the kitchen window where she had watched William pack his belongings. But everything felt different now. William was in the garden with the children, helping Louis build a fort out of fallen branches while George and Charlotte gathered leaves for decoration. Their laughter carried through the glass, a sound that had become precious again rather than something she took for granted. The reconciliation hadn't been a fairy tale. There had been awkward dinners where they struggled to find conversation topics beyond the children and work. There had been arguments that felt both familiar and new, disputes that required them to practice the communication skills they had learned in therapy. There had been moments when both of them wondered if they were trying to force something that was meant to stay broken. But there had also been breakthroughs. The first time William had reached for her hand during a movie, and she had let him take it without analyzing what it meant. The morning when Catherine had woken up early to make William's favorite breakfast, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to see him smile. The evening when they had stayed up until midnight talking about their dreams for the future, not just for their children or their causes, but for themselves as individuals and as a couple. Their first official date had been wonderfully awkward. William had picked her up at the house they now shared again, dressed in a suit as if he were meeting her for the first time. Catherine had chosen a blue dress he had always loved, then changed her mind twice before settling on something completely different. They had gone to a small restaurant in the countryside where they could talk without interruption or recognition. "This is strange," Catherine had said over appetizers, and they had both started laughing at the understatement. "Good strange or bad strange?" William had asked. "Nervous strange," Catherine had admitted. "Like I want to impress you, but I'm not sure how anymore." That honesty had broken the ice, and they had spent the rest of the evening rediscovering each other's sense of humor, sharing stories from their months apart, and carefully exploring what they wanted their future to look like. The dating phase had lasted 3 months, during which William had maintained his apartment while spending increasing amounts of time at the family home. They had approached their relationship with the kind of intentionality that most couples only discover after years of trial and error. Every weekend they planned special time together, away from work and children. Every week they had a conversation about how they were feeling and what they needed from each other. Catherine had been surprised by how much she enjoyed getting to know this version of William. The separation had changed him in subtle but significant ways. He was more present during conversations, more willing to share his vulnerabilities, more curious about her thoughts and feelings. It was as if the pressure of trying to be the perfect royal husband had been lifted, allowing his authentic personality to emerge. William, in turn, seemed fascinated by the woman Catherine had become during their time apart. Her newfound confidence in expressing her needs, her clearer sense of her own identity, and her ability to be happy independently had made their reunion feel like a choice rather than a default. "I like who you are when you're not trying to take care of everyone else first," William had told her during one of their weekly check-ins. "I like who you are when you're not trying to manage everything perfectly," Catherine had replied. The children had adjusted to their parents' reunion with the same adaptability they had shown during the separation. They seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamic, that their parents were choosing to be together rather than simply staying together out of obligation. George had been the most observant, commenting one day that Mummy and Daddy seemed to like each other again. Charlotte had started drawing pictures of the whole family together, adding details like holding hands and smiling faces. Louis had simply declared himself happy that Daddy was home for breakfast again. The public announcement of their reconciliation had been carefully crafted, emphasizing their commitment to their family and their growth as individuals and as a couple. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with many people expressing admiration for their willingness to work on their relationship, rather than simply accepting its deterioration. But the real test hadn't been public opinion or media coverage. It had been the daily choice to prioritize their relationship alongside their other responsibilities. They had established new routines, a morning walk together before the children woke up, technology-free dinners as a family, and a weekly date night that was protected from all other commitments. Catherine had continued her individual therapy, and William had done the same. They had also started couples counseling again, but this time with a different purpose. Instead of trying to save a failing marriage, they were learning to build a stronger one. The difference, Dr. Reynolds had observed during one of their sessions, is that you're both here because you want to be, not because you feel you have to be. That changes everything. Now, watching William chase Louis around the garden while Charlotte attempted to crown George with a wreath of leaves, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the reconciliation, but for the journey that had led them here. The separation had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had forced them both to grow in ways that staying together might not have allowed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How are things?" Catherine smiled as she typed back, happy, genuinely, surprisingly happy, and she was. Not because their life was perfect or their marriage was without challenges, but because they had chosen each other with full knowledge of the work required. They had looked honestly at their flaws and failures and decided that their love was worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth choosing again and again. William came inside with all 3 children hanging off various limbs, all of them covered in dirt and grinning widely. "We're going to need baths all around," Catherine announced, but she was smiling. "Group bath," Louis declared, which sent Charlotte into giggles and prompted George to roll his eyes in the way that only 10-year-olds could manage. "I'll handle the chaos," William said, dropping a kiss on Catherine's temple as he herded the children toward the stairs. "You look like you could use a few minutes of peace." Catherine caught his hand before he could follow the children. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For coming back. For trying again. For not giving up on us." William turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face in the gesture that had always made her feel completely seen and loved. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I would choose you in every lifetime, in every version of this story. I'm just grateful we figured out how to choose each other better in this one." As the sounds of bath time chaos echoed from upstairs, Catherine and William stood in their kitchen, holding each other and marveling at the long, difficult, beautiful journey that had brought them back to this moment. They had said a silent farewell to the marriage they used to have, and in doing so, they had found the courage to build something new. Their goodbye had brought millions to tears, but their hello was bringing joy to the people who mattered most, themselves, their children, and everyone who still believed that love, with enough work and wisdom and willingness to change, could overcome anything.